You're listening to The Bounding Box, where we talk about web development, geo development, and everything in between.
Welcome to the Bounding Box, and today I am joined by the one and only Bill Dollins, who uh, I actually had thought of starting a podcast a few years ago, and I have this huge list of people I want to ask, and Bill was like at the very top of that list, even from a few years ago when this thing was just like an idea. So I'm very glad to have Bill on today.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. I appreciate that.
Bill, just tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and what your problem is.
What my problem is, I'll get to that last. All right. So, as you said, I'm Bill Dollins. What I do. So, my current role is I'm the Chief Information Officer at Fulcrum, which many may know as a spatial-enabled mobile data collection platform. We've kind of expanded beyond that a bit, but my role is mostly behind the scenes these days as a CIO. So I manage all of our internal corporate systems and the interoperability between them. I run our data operations team, which is mostly focused on product analytics, how people are using Fulcrum, what that means, getting that information out to the right internal stakeholders. So a lot of data sciencey type stuff. I do a
Nice.
lot myself in BigQuery, and then I have a team under me that does a lot as well. They're way better at it than I am, but it's my avenue to still keep my hands dirty. And then I also oversee our professional services team, which that's a loose thing because they're pretty much on autopilot. They don't need a whole lot from me. They're a great group of guys that knows Fulcrum inside and out and a lot of other things because professional services is all about integrating with other systems.
Yeah.
So I manage those three functions: IT and corporate systems, data ops, and professional services. That's my daily life. Prior to Fulcrum, where I've been here for 5 years, I spent 25 years almost as a federal contractor, 15 of which I was a partner in a firm with 3 other people. We did a lot of cool stuff over that 15 years. And during that time, I've pretty much always been like a geospatial developer, integrator, many hat wearer. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, and I remember seeing that you had your own thing kind of going for quite a long time. So you built quite a bit of experience in a lot of hats, I'm guessing. From
Yeah.
very hands-on stuff to having to manage projects and contracts and everything like that, which I can imagine is quite a handful.
Yeah. I mean, it can get, depending on the size of the contract, if you're doing federal work, it can be pretty consuming. As a partner, there weren't a whole lot of 40-hour weeks. 40-hour week is practically
Yeah.
vacation. You have to do everything. You have to write the proposals, lead proposal teams, do the staffing. Once the staffing's in place, manage the work, and in a lot of cases, do the work depending on the size of your company. So that was,
Did you find in working in that a lot of those contracts were looking for like GISP workers or people working on projects that had GISPs?
I never once saw that as a requirement in
No.
ours.
Oh, okay. That's
No,
like the
I was working at the federal level. It just never happened there. I think I'd seen a few like state and local that we didn't bid on, but I knew they occasionally you would see some key personnel needed a GISP, but
okay.
I never ran into it.
I did a little bit of contract work way back when, and that was like on a couple of things I had applied to, and I had happened to have it at the time, but I always was curious if that was like for people that already been doing this kind of thing for a while, like having that GISP is something to use just for contract kind of work, but maybe
Yeah.
not. Maybe it's not something that is necessarily needed much. I let
Yeah.
mine lapse. I didn't do the test or anything. Maybe
Right.
someday.
Yeah. The test, I think the test probably makes it a little more stringent.
Yeah.
My problem with it, and problem is a loose term. I didn't have a whole big problem with it, was just that the way it was before, having a GISP didn't really help me understand what you actually knew how to do,
Exactly.
because it was all based on your previous experience and your portfolio and things like that. So with the test, it's at least centering on a core set of skills. So now going forward, if you have that, I know you've at least had to sit and kind of understand those concepts.
Because before, if you just had like a few years of experience under your belt, maybe went to a conference or two with a cert, then that was it. You could get your GISP like nothing. So
Right.
Now it's a
Right.
little bit more work to do.
Yeah. So it was, typically if you saw it in an RFP, it was probably an intentional discriminator. It was usually a clue that they probably already knew who they wanted.
Yeah. Those are always fun with stick. You read those RFPs and they're very, very specific. You're like,
Yes.
they already know who they want for this particular project. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. You get pretty good at identifying those and just saying, I'm going to set that one aside and move on to the next one.
So I'm guessing that today you don't get to do a whole lot of hands-on code today, but do you still keep up with stuff? Do you still write a little bit of Python, or you say you just still do some BigQuery stuff, right? So
Yeah. So probably the thing I do most these days is SQL and BigQuery, and there is some spatial components to that as well. It has spatial objects and spatial functions, not nearly on the level that PostGIS or something like that does, but there's enough. And we use that periodically for certain back of the house functions, like setting up sales territories or helping kind of identify sales tax regions and that sort of thing. So there are even in like back of the house business functions, location matters.
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and then we use a lot of SaaS platforms for the back of the house stuff, like it's Salesforce or it's Stripe or things like that. All of those have APIs, and sometimes you still need to do some custom stuff. So I spin up a little bit of Node occasionally to just kind of prototype out some API scraping and that sort of thing. I usually have to hand that off to someone else to make it production, but yeah,
that's cool. At least you get to do a little bit of a hands-on work, not just complete. Well, I guess it is to complete management, but you still get your hands dirty every now and then.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I did for so long. If I go too long without doing it, it starts to bug me. It's sort of like I need it. It's a great mental reset to just sit down and write some code for a day.
Yeah, exactly. So, what is your degree in? What you actually went to school for before you got into this field?
So, I refer to myself as an accidental geographer. My degree was in information systems from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I spent 2 years in the CS program. Just it was not people oriented enough for me, so I switched over to IS. And so that was my degree. I didn't hear the phrase GIS like once. Well, actually, I did hear it once during a lecture, and the lecturer sort of referred to it almost like it was like this weird oddball field of tech that you should avoid like the plague. So that was what I knew about GIS. We had one guy in the CS program who switched out of CS, and we didn't understand what he was doing. We thought he was going to do cartography. So we were picturing like etching things on tables and stuff. I look back now and go, that was probably our lack of understanding, and he probably switched over to the GIS program that our university had that I had no idea about. So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
So when you got out into the field, like in working and stuff like that, it's just kind of like you started working at a company that did GIS and kind of fell into it that way.
Yep, that was the very first job I found.
Okay.
There was a small company in the town where I was working. There was a little bit of a recession going on when I graduated from college, so I was actually tending bar for a few months. And one of my regulars was hiring, was kind of telling me that he's having trouble finding people. I was like, yeah, I have a degree in information systems. He's like, what? So I went and interviewed, and they were mapping Army bases.
Okay.
The Open Skies Treaty had just been signed. So that was the one where all the member nations could, on like 24 hours notice, overfly and take photos and things like that. So they needed to map all the bases to know what was there and that sort of thing. So my first job, I basically was digitizing them in AutoCAD. We were doing heads up, scanning maps and digitizing. And so that was like the first 6 months or so. And then we had to take the digitized maps and load them into MapInfo. That was the GIS we were using back then. And so then that required like registering the maps, the drawings from table space to geographic space. And so that's when I first actually got to write some code, because like we had one senior programmer who didn't have time for the project, so he kind of looked over my shoulder while I wrote the code. It worked. And then eventually moved the whole process to ArcInfo. So then I learned AML, and then after that I was a GIS developer
Oh
for
wow.
the rest
It's
of my career.
crazy how that rolls like that. I hear a lot of similar stories like that. You just kind of get roped into it by accident, and
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is
Yeah.
about it. It pulls you in, and like you find you got a pretty good groove with it. It's a nice niche to get into. So
Oh yeah, and it's crazy things. Like I'm just writing code, and yeah, the one geographer looks at me and says, "So what did you do to like reconcile the projections?" And I was like, "What's a projection?" And so she's like, "Oh well, you did nothing. Let me show you what you need to do."
oh, that's awesome. I guess that leads me to my next question. You recently had posted up that you got your MBA, right?
Yes.
So how
Yes.
about that? I mean, is that just something that you wanted to do, or is that something you wanted to do for work, or like a life goal type of thing?
I've been kicking around for several years now, doing some graduate level programming. See, it's in my blood. It's programming. I can't say program without ending it with the ing. And it was sort of back and forth as to what I wanted to do. And I'd actually started teaching a master's level leadership course in a geography program. So here I was, the guy with a 20-year-old bachelor's degree, teaching in a master's program.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I finally just kind of settled on the MBA. During the pandemic, you needed something that was online. University of Maryland has a great online school they have for years. Like their online school obviously didn't start online. It started as like a remote distance learning thing in the 50s, servicing the military population that cycles through the DC area. So they were very on top of, like they had obviously gone fully online 10 years ago or
Wow.
more. So while everyone else was trying to figure it out for the pandemic, they were just like, hey, we just do what we do. So that was easy in that regard. Like the learning management system was pretty clean and that sort of stuff. So that's why I chose that. I kind of settled on the MBA as sort of a way to just sort of fill in the gaps. Like I was a partner in a company for 15 years. You learn a lot.
Mhm.
Usually by trial and error, all the financials, that sort of stuff. But I just decided, and then here I am. I've been a C-level executive for 5 years, and it's felt like getting the MBA would sort of round things out and fill in some gaps.
Yeah.
That when you're doing it just by feel, you only know what you run into. So
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those degrees I've always been interested in looking at and stuff. It's always in the back of my head whether I should try it again. But yeah, I enjoy that. I think I might give that a shot at some point. It just gives you a real well-rounded education, you say.
yeah, I'm glad I did it the way I did, because I'm later in my career, because I do have a technical background in something. So the MBA sort of you reach a point in your career where you have to understand the business you're working in.
Yeah.
And so the MBA helps with that. I think if I had gone directly in an MBA program out of the bachelor's, I probably wouldn't have gotten as much out of it, or I would have, then just been like a business person without the technical context.
Yeah.
So
You have a lot to back it up now.
yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so I wanted to ask you, Bill, you've been doing this for a while. What has excited you in GIS in recent years? I mean, looking back at like the past, and like I said, there's been a lot that's gone on the past 20 some years and stuff like that. Is there anything that recently has kind of excited you?
Well, the thing that really excites me lately, and this is everyone's sort of talking about it, it's probably not the most original answer, is just the activity in the EO space. With satellite imagery and aerial imagery, and everything that's just become available, and sort of the value-added analytics that are going on top of that. I'm actually less interested in the pixels than what people do with them. So the fact that you can use machine learning now to train algorithms to like pull features out and start doing analytics directly from the raw imagery, that was stuff we were dreaming of 10 years ago even. So that the development itself is pretty exciting. The speed with which we got there, because this was like science fiction a decade ago. Like, maybe in
Yeah.
30 years, by the time I retire, we'll be able to do that. No, it was within 5 years, it was prototyped, and here we are now. It's pretty much commonplace. So the speed with which geospatial technology is accelerating and being applied is really exciting. The innovation that comes along with that, I've been pretty excited about sort of I don't know the right way to put it, but essentially I guess I'll say the proliferation of, and I know you work for Esri, don't take this the wrong way, of open source technologies kind of in conjunction with the cloud, because I feel like those technologies, and I know Esri uses a lot of open source tools, and so does Fulcrum. So yeah, I feel okay saying this. It's easy to kind of pull those apart and break them up and sort of deploy them in a targeted way. So we're now at a point where I don't need to deploy an entire GIS stack to solve one small problem. I can pull the pieces I want out, deploy it into a cluster, scale it up on demand, tear it down as demand goes away, and I'm not incurring giant licensing costs while I'm scaled out, and I'm not deploying more software than I need. That also wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago.
Oh, wow, that's very cool. Yeah, that's one of those.
I mean, the Esri stack was heavy, but even like on the open source side, like if you were doing like a GeoServer thing, that's pretty much heavy too. I can pull all that stuff apart and just deploy what you need.
That's really cool. I haven't really looked at all of that part. I mean, I've done GeoServer, map server, and everything, but I haven't looked at working with like imagery or satellite stuff. I didn't really get into remote sensing or anything. But you're like the second or third person that's actually brought that up. Satellite imagery and just the way you can analyze this stuff today and the speed of it and everything that's it's come up with it. So I think I need to take another look at that because
and I say that as a vector guy. My whole career has been on the vector side.
Yeah.
I had a coworker who said you're either a pixel pusher or a vector bender. I've always been on the vector bender side. So, but I've been pretty impressed with what they've been doing on the pixel side.
I gotta make that into a t-shirt. That's very cool.
Yeah. I don't think he copyrighted it, so I think you're safe.
All right, Bill. Well, I want to be very conscious of your time here, but I do want to ask if there's anything else you want to talk about, or if you got a tip for listeners, something they can take away from this. Completely open to you here.
So I guess lessons from my own experience recently is to just never. My first tip is just to always try to stay fresh. It's kind of easy to kind of fall into doing the same thing every day. And I did that for a number of years, when I was doing federal work. So, leaving that behind and coming to Fulcrum was an intentional choice to kind of get into a different area of the tech sector. And then picking up on, fitness and health, and then doing my MBA. I'm trying to stay fresh and keep myself renewed. And that can take an infinite number of forms depending on your interests. But I think it's very important.
That's right. You're always posting up about your runs and everything you do like that. What is your trail or roads for running? Or what do you have access to most for your runs?
So I have access to roads most. Like we have a trail nearby, but it's paved. I live in a pretty rural area, but the trails that are suitable for running that aren't going across private property or something like that are a few miles away.
Okay.
I mostly run roads, but I do like trail running because it requires a little bit more mentally. You have to pay attention to the terrain you're running on and obstacles and that sort of thing. And also just like running on ground is easier on the joints. Sometimes when I'm training for a long race, I'll switch over to trail running for a couple of weeks to just sort of give my joints a little rest.
Have you geeked out and pulled any analytics on your runs over time?
I have. I don't do it on a regular basis, but I use Strava, so I will actually go down and pull the GPXs and kind of map my stuff and kind of see like the terrain and that sort of thing. That's pretty easy to do these days. I've made like custom maps of some of my favorite races that I've run. And that's cool.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Bill. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. I'll talk to you soon.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bounding Box today. Please subscribe for more content.